When I observe Mickey Mouse for the first time, I do not see him as the world sees him, a symbol of joy, nostalgia, and childhood. I see him as a psychic phenomenon. A smiling, eternally cheerful, anthropomorphic mouse is not an innocent detail of human fantasy. It is a desperate attempt to domesticate what frightens us. Mice, nocturnal creatures associated with filth, pests, and chaos, were transformed into ambassadors of innocence. And to me, this reveals a profound unconscious operation. When we cannot eliminate a fear, we try to make it adorable. Mickey is therefore a collective psychological defense, a comforting reinterpretation of what the mind wishes to suppress. There is something particularly intriguing in the fact that Walt Disney's first great creation was precisely a mouse. Humans and mice share an ancient symbolic landscape: survival, darkness, primitive impulses, proliferation, lack of control. By dressing this animal in white gloves and presenting it smiling before the public, modern culture performed a brilliant and dangerous psychic trick. We replaced terror with tenderness, disgust with laughter, the animal instinct with childlike fantasy. It is as though we domesticated the unconscious through a cartoon. Yet what draws my attention the most is not the character's appearance, but the emotional intensity he evokes. Mickey is not merely a product of entertainment, he is an archetypal symbol. His figure activates a deep zone of the mind, where the childlike and the instinctual coexist. He maintains the lightness of childhood without completely abandoning the primitive energy of the animal. This combination is psychologically explosive. The innocent reinforces safety, while the instinctual awakens fascination. That is why Mickey never ages. He remains eternal, not by magic, but because he occupies a strategic point in our psyche. Another fundamental point: Mickey does not speak with the voice of a mouse, but with the perfect voice of an optimistic mascot. His vocal expression is carefully crafted to suppress any shadow of aggression, any hint of threat. This is how the collective psyche operates in the face of its fears. When something triggers anxiety, we quickly coat it with a layer of cuteness. The same happens with disturbing dreams that we try to reinterpret in a more acceptable way upon waking. Culture did with Mickey exactly what the ego does with the id's impulses. It softened them, censored them, and turned them into spectacle. But the choice to make Mickey the central face of an entire cultural empire is not accidental. He represents what modern society desires most: emotional control. Observe, even when everything around the character collapses, he keeps smiling. He never loses his good humor. He resists chaos with an almost artificial lightness. And by watching this, the audience receives a silent message. This is how you should handle your life. Mickey is less a character and more a psychic ideal, a protective persona built to anesthetize reality. I would even say that Mickey has become a kind of perfect child of the collective imagination. He does not cry, does not feel anger, does not seek revenge, does not suffer deeply. His artificial purity contrasts with the emotional complexity we all carry, and it is precisely this fabricated purity that makes him so attractive. He is what we once were, but also what we wish we could continue being. The child who knows nothing of suffering, the animal that abandoned its dangerous instincts. Mickey is an emotional narcotic. The more we look at him, the more we forget our own contradictions. However, beneath the friendly surface, Mickey carries powerful symbolic content. He is an animated figure built upon what humanity fears and represses, and that is the key to his strength. He is not simply adorable. He is domesticated. He is not simply popular. He is normative. He teaches, even without speaking explicitly, how we should behave, smile in the face of discomfort, play in the face of chaos, maintain lightness amid psychic storms. This pleases the superego, but destroys self-knowledge. We live trying to be as unshakable as Mickey, without realizing that such a posture requires constant repression. In the end, I state without hesitation, Mickey Mouse is not just a Disney creation. He is a cultural symptom. He reveals that humanity prefers to turn its fears into mascots rather than confront them, prefers to put white gloves on its impulses rather than acknowledge them, prefers to smile alongside an enchanted mouse rather than look at its own shadow. By understanding Mickey, we understand ourselves, not what we are, but what we desperately try to appear. When I look at Mickey Mouse, beneath the charm and the immaculate smile, I see something far more primitive than the world dares to admit. I see the id, the raw, impulsive, pleasure-seeking core of the psyche, dressed up in white gloves and childlike enthusiasm. The brilliance of Mickey's design is precisely this. He allows society to adore its own instincts without ever acknowledging them. The id is usually frightening, dark and chaotic, yet here it appears sanitized, playful and safe. The public embraces Mickey without realizing that what they actually embrace is the part of themselves they spend their entire adult lives trying to repress. It fascinates me that Mickey's energy is perpetual. He's always in motion, always excited, always eager, a creature incapable of boredom or restraint. This alone reveals his symbolic function. The id does not rest. It pulses, demands, insists. Mickey's unstoppable vibrancy mirrors the restless desire that lives inside every human being. But instead of appearing as a force of appetite or aggression, it materializes in him as pure joy. That is the deceit of animation. It shows the id not as a monster, but as a friend. A small, harmless-looking mouse who ironically represents the very impulses we fear most in ourselves. Another revealing detail is Mickey's emotional simplicity. He seeks pleasure immediately and wholeheartedly. He reacts without hesitation. He laughs loudly, loves instantly, panics impulsively, and celebrates without measure. There is no deliberation in him, only movement, a perpetual yes to whatever sensation presents itself. This is the precise architecture of the id. It does not negotiate, it does not reflect, it does not postpone, it simply wants. And by presenting this raw wanting in a harmless creature, the culture found a socially acceptable way to keep its own emotional hunger alive without confronting the responsibility of acknowledging it consciously. One must also consider the physical expressiveness of Mickey's body. His exaggerated gestures, wide eyes, elastic limbs, and dramatic reactions are not mere stylistic choices. They are manifestations of instinct liberated from inhibition. In real life, we restrain our impulses to maintain order and decorum, but Mickey frees the viewer from these constraints. He jumps, stretches, collapses, explodes with emotion, the body acting as the id would act if the ego were not constantly policing it. People find this amusing because deep down, they are longing for that degree of unfiltered spontaneity. Mickey's antics are not childish, they are instinctual. Yet there is something even more telling. Mickey almost always escapes consequences. No matter how reckless, impulsive, or chaotic he becomes, the world bends to protect him. This mirrors the fantasy life of the id, which refuses to recognize limits or reality. The id imagines a world tailored to its desires, and Mickey inhabits exactly such a world. When the audience watches him triumph effortlessly over danger or mischief, they are watching their own unconscious wish fulfillment. The id whispers, "I want," and Mickey's universe responds, "Of course you do." This is why the character feels so intoxicatingly comforting. He lives the life we wish we could live without guilt or penalty. But despite this, Mickey remains lovable, never frightening. That is the cultural camouflage at work. The id, when exposed in its true form, is too raw, too animalistic, too overwhelming. So the culture softened it, infantilized it, and dressed it in politeness. The white gloves, the high-pitched voice, the perfectly round shapes. These are psychological disguises. They hide the instinctual nature beneath layers of cuteness, allowing the audience to interact with the id without ever feeling threatened by it. It is the most successful sublimation I have ever observed, the wild impulse transformed into a marketable icon. Interestingly, this sanitized id becomes a form of emotional escapism. Viewers project into Mickey the vitality they lack, the freedom they suppress, the thrill they fear. He becomes a surrogate for the inner child, yes, but more accurately, he becomes a surrogate for the inner animal, the part of us that wants to leap before thinking, to laugh loudly, to desire openly, to exist without the constant weight of self-critique. Mickey is the id, permitted to exist in daylight, in public, with applause. It is no wonder that entire generations cling to him as a symbol of joy. He is the liberation they dare not pursue consciously. And so I assert that Mickey Mouse is not merely a drawing, nor a mascot, nor a nostalgic figure. He is the embodiment of instinct, rewritten as innocence, a carefully tamed representation of the wildest part of our psyche. When people adore Mickey, they are adoring their own suppressed impulses, finally allowed to breathe, even if only in fantasy. And this, paradoxically, is both his magic and his danger. He makes the id invisible by making it adorable. Mickey Mouse functions as one of the clearest symbolic representations of the ego in modern popular culture. When Freud describes the ego as the mediator between the wild impulses of the id and the severe demands of the superego, he is essentially describing someone trapped between adventure and chaos. And that is precisely the role Mickey plays in almost every narrative he inhabits. He is the bridge between extremes, the character who must keep the fantasy world from collapsing while maintaining some sense of internal stability. Watching Mickey is, without noticing it, watching the ego attempt to survive its daily psychological negotiations. One of the most striking aspects of Mickey's character is the way he reacts when things fall apart around him, and they always do. In countless episodes, shorts, and films, Mickey is placed at the center of a problem he did not create. A machine spinning out of control, a friend causing trouble, a magical element breaking the rules, or an unexpected danger threatening the environment. Yet Mickey rarely responds with panic or aggression. Instead, he leans into adaptability, creativity, and quick thinking. Freud would say that Mickey represents the ego's obligation to manage crises, even when those crises arise from forces completely outside its control. Another essential quality that links Mickey to the ego is his emotional steadiness. He is impulsive enough to be relatable, moral enough to be admirable, and imaginative enough to remain approachable. In this way, he mirrors the ego's constant struggle, remaining grounded while still allowing space for spontaneity, joy, and desire. Mickey never abandons his sense of wonder, but he never lets wonder sweep him into recklessness. This duality is not accidental. It is the essence of emotional regulation, and it is why audiences unconsciously see Mickey as a model for internal balance. Compared to other Disney characters, Mickey's psychological role becomes even clearer. Donald Duck explodes under pressure, representing the id in its raw emotional intensity. Goofy floats through life detached, operating almost outside of logic entirely. Pluto acts by pure instinct, guided by sensation alone. Mickey, however, stands in the middle, the negotiator, the organizer, the emotional adult in a universe full of exaggerated personalities. He is the one who must integrate all these chaotic energies into a functional reality, and that mirrors the ego's daily task, harmonizing the conflicting energies within the mind without losing its own composure. There is also a symbolic beauty in how Mickey deals with adversity. Each time a situation spirals out of control, Mickey recalibrates. He reassesses his options, repositions himself, and continues moving forward. Freud argued that the ego survives by adjusting reality into manageable pieces, even when that reality is overwhelming. Mickey does this instinctively, and in doing so, he shows viewers what psychological resilience truly looks like. It is not about denying difficulty. It is about navigating difficulty without surrendering identity or values. Another layer of identification comes from Mickey's emotional leadership. He is not only trying to manage his own inner world, he is often responsible for guiding the characters around him. Whether calming Donald, motivating Goofy, or protecting Minnie, Mickey takes on the role of emotional anchor, the one who must stabilize the environment when everyone else becomes consumed by their impulses. Freud would say this reflects the ego's role in maintaining social harmony, mediating between the needs of the self and the needs of others. Mickey embodies the idea that emotional maturity involves caring not only for yourself, but for the world you influence. It's also important to recognize the psychological comfort Mickey provides to the audience. We see in him something we desperately want to believe about ourselves, that we can remain composed under pressure, optimistic amid chaos, and resourceful when facing the unexpected. Mickey becomes a kind of psychological mirror. Through him, viewers project an idealized version of their own ego, competent, hopeful, flexible, imaginative, and capable of restoring order even when everything seems lost. Mickey is not simply entertaining, he is aspirational on a subconscious level. Ultimately, Mickey serves as a model because he shows us what the ego could be at its best. He demonstrates that joy and responsibility can coexist, that fear and courage can share the same space, and that chaos does not need to break us. In a world that constantly pushes us to emotional extremes, Mickey stands as a symbolic reminder that balance is possible, that resilience can be gentle, that strength can be kind, and that the human psyche can remain centered even when the narrative of life becomes unpredictable. Mickey's ability to smile through storms is not naivete. It is the ultimate expression of psychological mastery. Disney's universe operates as one of the most powerful cultural superegos ever constructed, a polished, smiling authority that quietly dictates how we should behave. Through Mickey Mouse and his companions, the audience is encouraged to internalize a specific moral tone. Always be kind, always be polite, always be optimistic, always do the right thing. It is a soft but persistent voice, a moral whisper embedded in bright colors, catchy melodies, and charming characters. Freud would argue that this carefully engineered world functions as an external superego, a guardian of values that the viewer gradually absorbs until those expectations feel like their own. Mickey Mouse, as the emblem of the entire Disney empire, becomes the embodiment of this internalized moral code. His perfection is intentional. He rarely makes mistakes, rarely expresses anger, and rarely acts from selfish impulse. He is constructed to be morally unshakable. In this sense, Mickey becomes a symbolic overseer, not just a character we enjoy, but a figure who subtly tells us how we ought to act. The superego often takes the form of an ideal image, a vision of who we must become in order to feel worthy. Mickey plays this role flawlessly. He is the idealized self who never falters, never disappoints, and never betrays his own ethical script. The most fascinating aspect of this dynamic is how natural it feels while watching. Disney doesn't need to preach morality directly. The lessons are woven into the framework of every story. Good triumphs, kindness is rewarded, dishonesty is punished, and characters who stray from virtue quickly return to their moral center. The superego, in Freud's definition, enforces societal norms through guilt and shame. Disney accomplishes this with gentler tools, melody, charm, and narrative structure. But the psychological result is remarkably similar. We internalize a model of behavior that pressures us to meet an impossible standard of goodness. This idealized version of the self becomes even more intense when Mickey is placed beside more flawed characters. Donald gets angry, Goofy gets confused, Pluto acts on instinct, villains succumb to greed or cruelty, but Mickey remains pure. The contrast is deliberate. Mickey's flawless nature reinforces the feeling that he occupies a higher moral plane. Freud would say that Mickey functions as a polished projection of the superego, standing above the imperfections of the emotional world. He is the should that watches over the is, observing the messiness of other characters while never participating in it himself. Because of this, Mickey exerts a psychological pressure that few people consciously recognize. He makes us feel that we ought to be better, cleaner, more composed, more cheerful. While he inspires admiration, he also evokes an unspoken sense of inadequacy, because no human being can maintain the serene moral perfection that Mickey displays effortlessly. This is the paradox of Disney's superego. It sets a standard that comforts children but quietly burdens adults. We compare ourselves to an ideal that was never designed to be realistic, and yet we feel guilty when we inevitably fall short. Another element of Disney's superego influence is the constant expectation of happiness. In Disney's world, the smile is almost mandatory, the positive attitude a form of virtue. But in reality, the superego often weaponizes such ideals, punishing us emotionally when we fail to remain joyful. Freud described the superego as the voice that condemns us whenever we deviate from internalized values. When Disney's culture teaches that smiling is a sign of moral alignment, people begin to feel guilty for sadness, frustration, or vulnerability. Emotions that are normal but become stigmatized under a regime of manufactured joy. At the same time, Disney's flawless moral universe creates a nostalgic illusion of order that no adult can fully inhabit. We crave it because it offers psychological safety, a world where problems are solvable, virtues are visible, and goodness always wins. But this very appeal amplifies the superego's authority. Mickey becomes a lighthouse towering over our emotional storms, silently insisting that we too should remain composed and heroic. The gap between our real selves and this idealized image becomes a breeding ground for shame. And shame strengthens the superego's grip. Ultimately, Mickey Mouse stands not merely as a cultural icon, but as a moral monument. He represents the unreachable standard that the superego, both personal and societal, imposes on us. Through him, Disney created a vision of perfection that shapes generations, defining what it means to be good in a way that feels natural precisely because it is everywhere. Mickey's smile is not just an expression, it is a commandment. And in trying to imitate that smile, we reveal how deeply the superego of mass culture has woven itself into the fabric of our identity. What fascinates me most about Mickey Mouse is not what he reveals about himself, but what he exposes about us. He is less a character and more a psychological mirror, a surface onto which we project our own repressed desires, childhood fantasies, and emotional vulnerabilities. When people look at Mickey, they are not admiring the traits of a fictional mouse. They are gazing at an idealized version of themselves, one untouched by conflict, guilt, or failure. In this sense, Mickey becomes an externalized version of the purity we wish we still possessed, the innocence we lost, and the emotional safety we long for in a chaotic world. Mickey's eternal optimism, his unbreakable cheerfulness, speaks directly to a hunger buried deep within the modern psyche, the desire to return to a state of internal security. In a world saturated with uncertainty, economic pressure, emotional instability, social fragmentation, Mickey presents an emotional refuge. His simplicity calms us because it contrasts so violently with the complexity of our inner lives. Freud would say, Mickey symbolizes our yearning to be protected from the storm of our own unconscious conflicts. He is the fantasy of a mind in balance, at peace with itself, untouched by the id's demands or the superego's punishments. But Mickey also embodies parts of ourselves we tend to hide. His playful mischief, his adventurous spirit, his bursts of courage, all echo impulses that adults often silence. The modern individual is trained to repress spontaneity in favor of productivity, to suppress wonder in favor of responsibility. When we watch Mickey, we reconnect, even if briefly, with instincts we have buried. The desire to explore, to laugh freely, to embrace the absurd without fear of judgment. Mickey reminds us of the child we once were and the impulses the adult world forced into hiding. At the same time, Mickey represents our ideal self, the perfected image we strive for but can never reach. He's always composed, always decisive, always morally aligned with the right path. The viewer unconsciously uses him as a benchmark of goodness, stability, and control. And yet, because no human can embody these traits flawlessly, Mickey also becomes a quiet reminder of our own limitations. Freud wrote that the ideal ego functions as a mirror reflecting what we think we ought to be. Mickey is that mirror, polished, flawless, untouchable, and our fascination with him reveals how deeply we yearn for perfection, even while knowing it is unattainable. There is also something revealing in the way Mickey avoids expressing strong, negative emotions. He rarely shows rage, despair, or profound sadness, emotions that are very real and very human. When we attach ourselves to this sanitized emotional world, it highlights a truth about our own discomfort with the darker sides of the psyche. Mickey's emotional simplicity exposes our fear of complexity. He shows us not who we are, but who we wish we could be if our internal conflicts were silenced, a fantasy version of the self in which the unconscious is tame, predictable, and harmless. The endurance of Mickey's popularity across generations also reveals a psychological continuity that transcends time, the eternal human search for emotional anchoring. Whether a child, an adolescent, or an adult, the viewer finds in Mickey a steady emotional tone, a sense of consistency in a world where inner and outer realities are unstable. This reliability speaks to our longing for a stable self, something firm inside us that does not crumble under pressure. Mickey's constancy mirrors our desire for internal continuity, a self that remains coherent even as life becomes increasingly fragmented. And yet the true revelation is this: Mickey survives and thrives not because he is complex, but because we are. He becomes whatever the viewer needs him to be: a friend, a hero, a guardian, an escape, an ideal. His simplicity allows us to project our own psychological narratives onto him without resistance. In this way, Mickey is an emotional canvas, absorbing our conflicts and returning them to us in symbolic form. The more complex our inner lives become, the stronger our attachment to this deceptively simple figure. Ultimately, Mickey Mouse does not reveal anything profound about the character himself. Instead, he exposes the architecture of the human psyche. He reflects our fears, our desires, our longing for innocence, and our pursuit of emotional safety. He is the bridge between our conscious aspirations and our unconscious wounds. When we look at Mickey, we are not witnessing the essence of Disney. We are confronting the essence of ourselves. And this, above all, is why the little mouse endures. He is the most cheerful, comforting mirror we have ever created.